first macromolecule or biological molecule that we're going to look at is called a carbohydrate. So a carbohydrate, you know them, you love them, right? Sugar, bread, good things, pasta. Carbs are a form of instant energy in our body, something like glucose or sucrose. Sucrose is like refined sugar, like the white sugar that you put into cookies or something like that. This is a kind of sugar that provides for you instant energy. It's the concept of like the sugar high, right? You eat all of the sugar and then you get this really big response from your body. It can be an instant form of energy. You can also store energy. This is my favorite, one of my favorite topics in biology is talking about glycogen. So glycogen is a kind of carbohydrate that gets stored in your muscles in order to allow you to do continuous exercise. You know when you start a new workout program and you get sore, and then eventually you can do the workout program and you don't get sore anymore? Well, sore is really a symptom of running out of energy at the site of activity. So I keep pointing to my quads because I'm a runner. As you run, as you continue running, your muscles need a certain amount of glycogen stored in your quadriceps in order for them to keep functioning. And so if you're just starting a new program, you might not have enough glycogen. And in that case, the next day you end up sore. But in just a few days, you can teach your body to make the right amount of glycogen, and then you can run and not grow weary. You can run and not get sore. It's pretty incredible. The other thing carbohydrates can do is they can form structural material. They don't do it so much for us humans, but they do it for insects, like the crunchy outside of an insect, or they can do it for plants, like the cellulose fibers that you bite into in a bite of celery. Carbohydrates are made from carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, famously in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Carbohydrates store and release energy, and they can provide structure and support. The monomer of a carbohydrate is called a monosaccharide. That's the general term for their monomer, and some examples of monosaccharides are glucose, galactose, and fructose. Glucose you might know and you might not know. It's a really common sugar in biology. Galactose you've probably never heard of before unless you're studying milk and bacteria. Again, a very common sugar that we talk about in biology. And fructose, though, you probably should have heard of before, in high fructose corn syrup. In high fructose corn syrup, what they do is they take and they add extra fructose to the corn syrup in order to make it extra sweet. Humans, animals, have been conditioned to like sweet, because if you were foraging out in the wild, you would need to find nutrient-dense food because you might only get to eat 1 or 2 bites of food. The problem with our current living situation is that we don't just get 1 or 2 bites of food in a day. We don't just get a handful of snacks. We have endless amounts of snacks, and that's why high fructose corn syrup can be considered bad. It's not bad if it's in moderation, but moderation is not really the name of the game in the American diet, am I right? Okay. These can exist in linear or ring structures, and actually what we can see is that glucose is what's stored in your blood cells, and having your high blood sugar or low blood sugar is really a measure of the amount of glucose that's in your cells. So if you have the glucose are the little blue dots, the red dots are your red blood cells. So if you have just a few little sugars in there, then you would have low blood sugar. If you have too many glucose molecules, too many blue dots, you would have high blood sugar. Both of those things make you feel pretty sick and pretty bad. If you have normal blood sugar levels, that's when your body is functioning at its peak or at its healthiest. So we mentioned before that carbohydrates can be structure or storage. When carbohydrates are energy, they're mostly monosaccharides. Polymers of carbohydrates are called polysaccharides, and these can be used for storage or for structure. And so, although similar to one another, the different molecules that do different things in different species have different names. That should make sense, right? So animals use something called glycogen for storage. I already mentioned that, right? That's what's in our muscles. So animals can use glycogen, while plants use a similar structure called starch. We know about starch, right? Starchy vegetables. This is like what's in a potato. This is what makes potatoes full of carbs, as we know it is, even though it doesn't taste sweet. So these storage kind of carbohydrates are not necessarily sweet tasting, but they still contain the same monosaccharides. Plants and animals can also use carbohydrates for structure. So plants use cellulose. I'm starting with that one because that one's probably more familiar. Celery is full of cellulose, right? Celery, cellulose, that like tough, crunchy bit that's in a plant, the part that helps a plant stand upright. It's all built off of cellulose fibers. We can extract them and use them to make paper or use them to make paper towels. And they give us that kind of scratchy, fibery kind of texture. In animals, we actually have a structure called chitin. Chitin is used in the exoskeleton of insects and lobsters and other shelled kind of crunchy organisms. And just kind of an interesting side note, that chitin that's used in the exoskeleton of those animals can also be extracted and used to make dissolvable stitches. It can be broken down, but it takes quite a long time for it to degrade. And so that's why they can put in like dissolvable stitches in a surgery, which is a pretty big deal, because imagine if you had like a big massive surgery and then they had to go back in and remove everything, they would cause as many problems kind of reopening you up, right? And so it's really cool that we can use these dissolvable stitches. They're pretty big in medicine. One of the major keys in biology is that structure gives function. And I just want to take a quick second. I know this might be like a little bit too much, okay? I'm gonna really stretch your brains for a moment, and I'm gonna show you that cellulose and chitin, which are both, remember the structural, they're not easily broken down by our bodies, and starch and glycogen have these kind of very similar structures. The difference is that starch, following along here, has all of its oxygens that bond it together. These are those little bonds that are bonding my monomers. All of those oxygens are on the same side, where if you look on cellulose, it's one on the same side and then one on the opposite side. And so we call that like cis and trans. And so what that means is that I've moved my oxygens so that water molecules can't get in to access them. If water molecules can't get in here to chitin and to cellulose, and they can't because of the structure, that's going to prevent water from breaking that down. Where if you're starch and you have the oxygens all arranged on the same side, that makes it easier for water to get in, and then water is able to break down the bonds. So the point here is that every molecule has a given structure, and that structure helps it to be effective in doing its job for the body.